Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marinos Ioannou and I represent Dromon Bureau of Shipping, a local classification society and greenhouse gas verification and validation body under the EU MRV, ETS, UK MRV, Fuel EU, Clean Shipping Index, and ISO 14064 series. Recently, for those who don't know us very well, we have also established a new research, development, innovation division, and we are proud to be participating in various European and national projects. So today, we will briefly go through the 2030 and 2050 emission reduction goals, and then we will look more into the status of the GHG emissions regulatory frameworks and the challenges encountered. Aiming to become the first climate neutral continent, the EU, under the European climate law, committed to reduce its emissions by at least 55% until 2030 and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Following the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55 legislation package was introduced. In Maritime, as part of the Fit for 55 package, the EU MRV regulation was adopted, which is now forming the basis of the EU ETS system. More recently, the European Commission has also adopted the Fuel EU Maritime regulation, which entered into force this year, promoting the use of renewable low-carbon fuels and clean energy technologies for ships, essential to support decarbonization in the sector. In the international scene, the basis of the GHG goals set was the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that was adopted in 2015. And as per the latest goal set in 2023, the IMO aims also to reach net zero by 2050. So regarding the EU MRV and ETS, this year we have the first verification at company level and the surrendering of the verified GHG emissions under the EU ETS for cargo and passenger ships over 5,000 gross tonnage. Offshore vessels over 5,000 GT are since the beginning of this year subject to the EU MRV regulation as well. However, their EUA surrendering will be enforced in 2027. The EU MRV regulation has also been extended to include smaller general cargo and offshore ships between 400 and 5,000 GT starting this year. This will be included in the ETS after the consideration by the European Commission, which is expected in the later years. So there are a lot of challenges relating to the implementation of the EU MRV and the ETS, but due to time limitation, we will only look into some selected challenges. So the verification deadline, which is something that affects us a lot as verifiers, has shrunk from this year onwards to the 31st of March opposed to the end of April, which was the case for previous years. And on top of that, the deadline is applied to the verification of emissions at the company level as well, leaving no room for delays in submission and verification of emissions data. Moreover, the verified data need to be reported to the administering authorities through the Union registry platforms by the 31st of May. The extension of the EU MRV regulation to offshore and smaller cargo ships is expected to create a phase-in learning curve. And as verifiers, we are going through a déjà vu phase with the onboarding of companies which are new to this field. The EU MRV regulation is structured based on the definition of commercial voyages, as we know, and this creates some issues on the implementation of the regulation for work vessels, which have specific operational profiles. Many of the affected stakeholders have raised these issues to the European Commission already. Specifically, they urge the regulators to restructure the reporting model to fit the operational profile of these specialized vessels, which do not engage basically in commercial voyages, as it is the case for cargo and passenger ships. The change of ownership is another issue that will now be inherited as well to the Fuel EU regulation. And for example, in an SMP scenario, the regulation requires the seller to complete the verification of the emissions for the part of the year the vessel was under their responsibility and submit it to the buyer. And the buyer, on the other hand, has the responsibility to submit on THETIS the verified annual aggregated emissions data. So they need to make sure that they collect the data and verify it for both of the two parties. This issue has already been discussed extensively at the EU level, since there are numerous cases where the buyer did not secure such data from the seller, exposing them to facing fines and detentions. Now, moving on to the Fuel EU regulation. As I said previously, it entered into force in the beginning of this year, and it is the most complex environmental regulation affecting shipping so far. Some key points for the Fuel EU regulation is that it applies to cargo and passenger vessels over 5,000 GT, and it also covers the entirety of the energy used on voyages between EU ports and while the ship is at berth within an EU port, and half of the energy used on voyages between an EU port and a port of a third country. The regulation covers well-to-wake GHG emissions, which calculates all emissions occurring from the fuel production, distribution, and consumption. The full life cycle, basically, of the fuel. Onshore power supply, OPS, is made mandatory for containers and passenger ships starting off 2030. And the vessel's compliance balance will need to be calculated and verified on an annual basis, similarly to the EU MRV and ETS. So there are different ways to ensure compliance and reduce or avoid the potential penalties for Fuel EU. For example, we have biofuels that can be used as a compliance option to reduce the well-to-tank GHG intensity of the onboard energy used. However, these fuels need to meet the sustainability criteria set out in the RED directive and also have a relevant certification. RNFBOs, which are renewable fuels of non-biological origin, such as e-diesel, e-methanol, e-LNG, etc., are incentivized by the European Commission and could effectively reduce in half the GHG intensity. However, these fuels, again, come at some premium cost, and it usually requires retrofits or even new vessels. Wind energy is also incentivized by the regulation as a green solution for reducing the GHG intensity of the ship. In general, the regulation considers electricity as zero emission by default. So this means that vessels using electricity as a main propulsion could generate compliance surplus and basically sell it by utilizing the pooling flexibility mechanism as one option. In addition, companies may choose to make use of the other two flexibility mechanisms, which are the banking and borrowing. When borrowing option is used, there is a 10% increase for the compliance balance to be achieved the following year. Ships resulting in a compliance deficit will need to pay a relevant penalty, which comes at 2,400 euros per ton of VLSFO energy equivalent. In addition, the DOC, the document of compliance, will not be issued until the penalty in case of a deficit will be paid to the administering state. Also, having a compliance deficit for 2 consecutive periods and above, there will be a 10% increase that will be applied on top of the penalty. And in general, the approach from the EU is to make paying the penalty the most expensive option, as it is designed basically to disincentivize people who don't act proactively. Moving to the UK, The UK government has announced their intention to introduce the UK ETS for shipping, which is expected to start next year. This is an expectation until now, as far as I understand. We have been invited as verifiers to participate in some discussions with the UK government to provide our feedback, among other stakeholders. There are many areas of concern. Of course, due to the time limit, we can just see some of the most important ones I selected. So we have the potential of having double payments and double reporting, basically between different schemes, such as the EU MRV and the UK MRV. So this has to be put in place properly and avoid this double payment, especially the payment reporting can be quite okay, but when you come down to the money, that's where the problem starts. Also, the responsible entity selection, according to the majority of the stakeholders, should mirror the same flexibility that it is done for the EU ETS, in contrary with the Fuel EU, which is a different case. So it should allow the ship owner to take the responsibility or to mandate the responsibility on the ISM manager. Phasing of emissions should have a gradual approach similar to the EU ETS when it comes to surrendering the allowances. And stakeholders have also expressed the need to provide extensive clarifications on the inclusion of offshore vessels, taking into consideration all the shortfalls that we had with the implementation of the EU ETS and the MRV, and the provided feedback on this matter. So there are many more potential issues, but we hope that a decision will be made soon enough by the UK government, so everyone will be aligned to these requirements. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to answering your questions at the panel.